as you know, undernutrition is the biggest single cause of the burden of disease. And it was estimated that every minute, 300 children under 5 die because of undernutrition. And almost 500 million children are at risk of permanent damage. It not only affects mortality, but it affects growth, current and future health. It also really affects your future potential in terms of your cognitive abilities and learning in school. So one response to this has been feeding programs, and they're widespread across low and middle income countries. And we were particularly interested in those that were given to young children, and our age range was 3 months to 5 years. This was, as far as we know, the first really comprehensive synthesis of their effectiveness. And we did something special. We did a systematic review as well as a complete process evaluation. So not only did we understand whether the programs were working, but why, the mechanisms behind them. So our objectives were to assess the effectiveness of these programs for improving the health of young children, to undertake a process evaluation in order to unpack those mechanisms that underlie the success or failure. And we were also interested in the impacts of these programs on equity. So as I said, we had 2 reviews integrated into one synthesis. We had an effectiveness review, and in that Cochrane review, we did a process evaluation and subgroup analysis. We also had a realist review that was led by Trish Greenhall, and a realist review is qualitative. It really tries to get at the mechanisms of action. And we followed standard Cochrane criteria. I won't go into all the methods, and new Rams's guidelines for conducting realist reviews. So what did we find? Well, we found that 34 studies met our inclusion criteria and 15 were excluded. The realist review included all of those included papers plus the excluded papers, and then 12 other more theoretical studies. 31 of those studies were from low and middle income countries, and 3 were from high income countries, but notably one of them was with Aboriginal children in Australia, and they are probably as marginalized as many young children can be. We had 21 randomized controlled trials and 9 controlled before and after studies. So a pretty good representation of trials. The participants they ranged in age from 3 months to 60 months. They were all low SES, and we judged that by if they were from rural areas, if their parents were not working or of working class, the slums had little running water, and the parents had low education. And the study size ranged hugely from a low of 30 to 3,000. So the presentation now on will concern low and middle income countries. We had 31 studies from there. 9 of these studies were conducted in daycares or feeding centers. 22 were take-home or home-delivered rations. They gave energy, food, with nutrients and micronutrients. It was quite interesting, the mix. Some gave local food, others gave ready-to-use therapeutic food or biscuits. And the energy content, which some foreshadowing here turns out to be quite important in effectiveness, ranged from 8% to 136% of the RDI. So a huge range there. Okay, so what did we find? Well, for growth, we found that the results were rather disappointing. There was significant impacts in both the RCTs and the controlled before and after studies. They were about the same, actually. 0.12 of a centimeter, 1/2 of a centimeter. So that's not much over 6 months. And over a year, that would be 0.24 of a centimeter. So not a lot on growth. Sorry. Okay, that was weight.
In centimeters.
It's weight in centimeters, yes. Imagine those centimeters converting instantly to kilograms. Okay, so for RCTs, we found a difference of 0.32 centimeters over 6 months compared to those who were not supplemented. And this is about 0.6 or 2/3 of a centimeter over a year. The control before and after studies showed non-significant effects. So those results on growth show that they can have some effect, but really not at all what we expected to find. For randomized controlled trials, for weight for age, 0.1 of a Z-score, so 0.1 of a standard deviation over 6 months. Height for age Z-scores, 0.15 of a standard deviation. And weight for height, it was non-significant. So there was a non-significant effect. For hemoglobin, there were 5 studies that looked at this, and all found non-significant effects. Now, I'm going to show you a forest plot. This is one from the review, and it shows height.
You've got away from this microphone.
I know. Okay, and imagine me pointing to that. And on the right-hand side is studies that were effective, and on the left-hand side is studies that were not effective. So the total, and this also shows it by years. So in under 12 months, there was some effectiveness. In the group age 1 to 2 years, there was some effectiveness, quite a bit, quite large effect. And in the group over 2 years, there was not much effect at all. But overall, there was a slight effect. Now, I'm really interested in psychosocial development because I have a background in psychology. The evidence was rather sparse, unfortunately. We had 5 RCTs on it, and 3 of those 5 showed that children who had been supplemented, given supplemental food, gained on standardized tests. They had higher scores. One had a difference that was equal to nearly half a standard deviation, and another, supplemented children gained 6.5 points on the Griffiths developmental quotient. Now, what is interesting is children who were both supplemented and stimulated, i.e. their mothers, were taught how to enhance their development through stories, through reading, through puzzles, toys. They gained nearly twice as much, 13.7 points. Now, in mental development, 2 out of 3 studies showed effectiveness for mental development. And again, they were moderate effect sizes. So the effect sizes for psychosocial development were somewhat higher than those for growth. Now, next we looked at who it works best for. It works best for children who are lower income and have poorer nutritional status. That's good. That means that it is helping to bring up those children who are the most poor. And interestingly, in 2 of the studies, low-income children only grew more if they were younger. So there was an interaction effect. Now, there was one study, oh my gosh, wow, that found that children in lower SES neighborhoods actually did worse because of feeding. And he said that community was so disorganized, so stressed, that preschool feeding just couldn't have any impact. It also worked best for children who were younger, and that fits with the previous literature reviews. And possibly, just possibly for girls, although there weren't nearly enough studies addressing this. It's mixed evidence. 3 primary studies showed that the feeding was more effective for girls, but our subgroup analysis showed no effect for females. Now, why were these programs less effective than we had envisioned on growth and, to a certain extent, psychosocial development? Well, one big thing that many of you in the development world will know about is that there is leakage within the family, that the caregiver or caregivers spread the supplement around the family, sometimes to older siblings or younger siblings, sometimes to the male head of the household. And if they were home delivered, they were the children were only benefiting from a third of the calories given. So if there were 600 calories given in the supplement, the children got 200. They benefited from that. If in daycare, the children did somewhat better. They benefited from 2/3 of the energy given. So daycare was somewhat better at ensuring that children got most of the supplement. Another reason for ineffectiveness was not enough energy was given. As you saw, some studies provided only 8%. What we did is we divided into low, medium, and high energy, and low energy was below 30% of the recommended daily intake. We found that programs which gave more than this 30% were much more effective. We also found that sometimes some authors attributed the fact of little effect to the fact that some of the foods given were of very high volume, so the children couldn't eat them all, but they had very low energy density. So it's better to give foods with higher energy density. Level of supervision also really affected results. We divided them into low, medium, and strict supervision was in a daycare setting or in home delivery. Often the researchers went, or the study implementers went every week. They checked the containers, they talked to the mom, made sure she knew what she was doing. And those with moderate and strict supervision did show more effectiveness. Then we come to caregiver capacity. In low-income countries and low-income communities, caregivers are often very stressed. They're trying to provide for their family, trying to get enough water, trying to look after a huge number of kids. And many also have low health literacy. Now, some of these programs did actually provide health literacy education. And there's a need for health literacy programs, and there's a need to educate mothers on overcoming this tradition of feeding males and heads of household. So how can we improve the effectiveness? Well, before you implement these programs, we suggest that work with the community, work with the caregivers to ensure that the intervention is wanted, needed, and that will work. And decide on what type of supplement you're going to give. Are you going to give local food or ready-to-use food? Closely supervise the distribution and intake. I know this is more resource intensive, but it makes a big difference. Target the most undernourished children or areas with a high proportion of malnutrition, and give at least 40 to 60% of the recommended daily intake for energy. And the reason that is so high is because it compensates in some ways for leakage within the family. Food should be palatable, that should go without saying, and they also should be energy dense, packed with calories. And fortification really works. Provide extra rations to the family. Some programs actually gave the children take-home rations or delivered take-home rations so that there would be less redistribution of the supplement. And work with caregivers and teachers to encourage stimulation of the child. Encourage continued breastfeeding, and it should begin early and continue for several years. Now, there is a need for more research, but not just more studies or more ICTs. We need to understand really how feeding affects psychosocial development. I only found a few studies. We really need to understand the impact on older children. Many of the studies were with younger children. And we also really need more research on the effect on gender. Does it help girls more than boys? And income inequality. And that's our team. Thank you.